Do you want your students to feel more confident and eager to share their ideas in the target language? Well, in this episode, we look at strategies that help learners move beyond just words and phrases and into real discourse and communication. I'm joined by Christina Margiore, who is a Spanish teacher in New York, and she's going to bring practical routines and low prep techniques that create a supportive environment and spark authentic conversations. You'll get lots of ways to increase student talk time right away. So let's jump in. Whether you're planning your first lesson or celebrating your 20th year in the language classroom, I understand exactly where you are. I'm Joshua Cabral, and I'm also a language teacher in my 29th year of teaching. Now, I also have the opportunity to support schools and teachers all across the country who are working towards increasing proficiency and building confidence in their students. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast, with over 200 episodes of practical strategies tested in real classrooms just like yours and mine. So let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral. And you know, I have to start every episode by reminding you that you are an incredible teacher, an incredible educator, because what are you doing? You are listening to a podcast about language teaching. You want to be introspective, you want to look at your teaching, you want to learn new stuff, and I think you are incredible just for simply doing that, and I am sure you do so much more that makes you a wonderful teacher. So thank you so much for being here. So today, speaking of wonderful teachers, I am joined by Christina Margiore, who is a Spanish teacher on Long Island. She teaches at the North Shore Schools, and she's been there for about 17 years teaching high school, and she has the privilege of teaching AP and IB classes. And you may have seen her out and about in the conference world and also here on the podcast as well. Way back on episode 121, we talked about chat mats, and she is kind of an authority in chat mats because she presented a workshop at NYSAFELT, which is the New York Association conference, and got best of, and then went on to NEXTFL, which is the Northeast Conference, where she presented it as well. So she knows what she's talking about there. You may have seen her at some virtual conferences like the World Language Teacher Summit, as well as the CLET World Languages Back to School Conference. So she's everywhere. We had a great conversation last time about chat mats, and today we're going to talk about techniques to get our students talking in the classroom. It is so great to have you back, Christina. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So anything else going on in your world of teaching since we last talked 100 episodes ago?
I know, 100. Congratulations. That's amazing. No, I think you pretty much covered it. I'm from Long Island. I teach Spanish mostly at the high school, every once in a while in the middle school. And I teach a lot of the AP and IB courses. So getting students speaking is something I've been passionate about because of that, because I see how far students have to go at the very end. So I try to bring it into my lower level classes and just help build their confidence right from the beginning and get them speaking even more.
So let's dive right in, because I think this is going to be one of the topics where we talk about techniques, and teachers are going to be listening. They're going to say, I want to listen to that again because I have to write it down. I was driving. So I'm sure we're going to have lots of takeaways for teachers here to get students talking in class. Just start from this place of teachers want to hear about this because it tends to be one of those areas where students struggle. You know, and teachers struggle with students giving maybe one-word answers, or they stick to those memorized phrases. They default to their native language, like all of those sort of obstacles that come up. And what are your insights on your experience of those barriers, of those obstacles that keep students from really engaging? What are those so we can start to recognize them?
So I think it's really interesting because no matter the demographic of students that we're teaching, where we're teaching, we all face the same challenge, right? Whether we're in the most technologically advanced school or, you know, we're teaching old school with paper or textbook or whatever our situation, we all struggle to get students to speak. So what is that combination? There are a few factors that I think, and in my experience and in my research, I've come across that can impede students from speaking in our classroom. So I think, first of all, we have the affective filter from Dr. Stephen Krashen. And that tells us that negative attitudes and emotions can impede the ability to learn. So that is a huge thing for us to understand, because we get students sometimes in level 2, level 3, and they might have had a negative experience before your class has even started. You can be the best teacher and have the most amazing class. But if that kid had a negative experience in another class, or even maybe they went to speak Spanish with someone when they were traveling and the person they spoke to laughed at them and they felt embarrassed, any sort of negative experience can impede their learning. And that really can stop them from producing. Because at the end of the day, we're dealing with teenagers, and teenagers are teenagers. They don't want to be embarrassed. We are asking them to take a risk every time they participate, because they know that they're probably going to make a mistake. They don't want to be laughed at. They don't want their friend to say, oh my gosh, why did you say that? So that's something to keep in mind, that we're fighting, a few battles here, and they just don't want to be embarrassed. And the negative previous experience can also affect what's happening in your classroom right now. So I think those are like the two biggest factors for most of us.
Yeah, I think that's a really important place to start, because when teachers are not seeing the success with students speaking in their classroom that they want right away, we as teachers, we're so devoted to our passion of teaching that we take that personally. And it's the way I did it, or it's the way that I taught. So it's that good reminder that we're going to talk about some great techniques to get them talking, but behind it all, sometimes they come in with some baggage. There's only so much we can do, and I'm sure you're going to teach us a lot of things that we can do, but it's a good reminder that sometimes they're coming in with their self-conscious demeanor or their experience from previous teachers. So that's a good thing for just teachers to keep in mind, that it's hard to not take it personal as a teacher, but thank you for starting with that so that we can just sort of keep those things in mind. So you talked about this being self-conscious. And so along with that, I'm thinking of the word anxiety, and that is huge right now. We have students that have anxiety. We talk about it all the time with my students. And so you emphasize with this idea of anxiety, and you mentioned also the affective filter going along with that. So how are you lowering that affective filter or lowering that anxiety to help students speak more confidently? Look over your routines or strategies to help, battle that.
Well, I think one of the most important things is what you just said, routine. When students do something routinely and they repeat it, they start to, they stop worrying about it, about what they're saying and, how they're doing it, and they focus on the product. So I think a lot of times when we try something new, we've all faced this. You try something new, you give the directions, students really don't understand the expectations. It doesn't work the way you wanted it to. You're frustrated. They're like, why are we doing this? This was horrible. And you just kind of, leave it on to the next. Once we have a routine and students are like, oh, okay, this is that activity again, or this is that style question again, their anxiety is going to become lowered, and actually their confidence is going to increase, because they're like, oh, I've done this before. So even if the question we're asking them is a little bit more complicated, or we're asking them to produce more complicated or advanced language, their confidence will be increased because they're familiar with this style activity. So if you can build routines into your classroom, and they don't have to be anything crazy. I know I only have a 40-minute period. So sometimes I struggle with routines because I don't want to lose 5 or 7 minutes at the beginning and then another 5 or 7 at the end. And then in the middle, I'm left with just a short 20 minutes to do something. So sometimes I can find myself struggling with that. But an example of a routine that's really easy to implement, and it builds classroom community and again, builds confidence because my students expect it, is just a simple weekend chat. So on a Monday, what did you do over the weekend? Or you could do it on a Friday. What are your plans this weekend? And students don't even realize it because they think you're just talking to them about their plans, and they want to talk about what they're doing because they're teenagers and they want to talk about themselves. So, a lot of times if it's, hey, what did you do over the weekend? Or what are you doing this weekend? they like to talk about that. So automatically they're engaged. And then they're expecting it. So in my class, we do it on Mondays, and we start every Monday with some sort of weekend chat. It can be just a basic, what are you doing? Or what did you do this weekend? And then I try to change it every week. So they know they're going to be speaking about their weekend. They don't know how. So last week we did 2 truths and a lie. Everybody wrote down 3 things. One of them had to be a lie. They read them out loud, and then we guessed. And they actually really enjoyed it. They were calling it the game, the 2 truths and a lie game. Which again, they're, more into it. So they're participating without even thinking about, am I making a mistake? So routines are huge. Weekend chats, just daily turn-in talks. Again, the safety of having just a little conversation with your partner instead of putting them on the spot. And, when they raise their hand, everybody's looking at them and listening. And are people judging me? Or, teenagers are complex. Who's friends with who? Who's interested in who? There's a lot going on that we don't see under the surface as well. And that can impede their participation in class. So just a small turn-in talk. You can put a simple question on the board about, if homecoming is going on at your school, what are your plans for homecoming? What do you like about homecoming? What don't you like? What would you want to change? If you were the principal, what would you do? It doesn't have to be content related. You're just encouraging them to speak to each other, and having something like that daily gets them speaking a little bit of Spanish. It's not, evaluative. I'm not grading them. I'm not correcting grammar, but I'm just encouraging that natural conversation. So I think that once we have a routine in place, it really helps them because they know what to expect, and that lowers their anxiety.
So what I'm hearing there is, in terms of routine, those are the structures, the frameworks that you work within, and then you can change out the content. So the students can focus on the content because they don't have that sort of cognitive load of, what's this new activity, this new game that I have to learn the rules to and use my Spanish? You sort of have your bag of tricks. I'll use it. That sounds a little pejorative. I don't mean it to come out that way, but your sort of your go-to activities, and they're used to, those are the routines, and you can easily change out the content.
Exactly. And it's almost like the pillars of your classroom because, you're building around it, exactly like you said. And it makes it easier for me because I also know what I'm doing on Monday morning. I know we're going to talk about the weekend, and I try to switch it up to keep them interested. Sometimes just asking them, what did you do this weekend every Monday without changing it can get a little boring. Then they're saying the same thing over and over again. So you do want to change it up a little bit and keep them interested, but also keep that routine where they know what the expectation is. And the expectation for me is you're going to speak in Spanish and share what you did over the weekend.
You mentioned just briefly about not grading it. So you were taking the anxiety off because you're not grading it there. And so do you find that because of that, it promotes more risk-taking with students? And so also along with that, I'm sure you're going to say yes to that, but talk about it a little bit. But I'm also curious how you keep students motivated to engage in the speaking activities when it's not graded, because sometimes that's the motivation for students. So how do you balance that risk-taking at the same time where it's not necessarily graded? So that's where it gets a little messy. So talk about what that looks like in your classroom.
Definitely. And I think we can all relate because a lot of our students are point obsessed. What is this worth? Are you grading? I mean, how many times are we going to hear, is this graded? And it comes to the point where you feel like you have to say yes every time or else they just don't do it. So I have found that the more interesting I make the question or the prompt, the more likely they are to participate. So another activity that you can do, and this one, I think we've all participated in, and again, we're not getting anything for it, is one of those like this or that quizzes, right? You see them on social media all the time. What kind of fall person are you? Do you prefer pumpkins or apples? Do you like apple cider or, pumpkin spice latte? And your answer, before you know it, you're answering the questions. No, why? We don't know. It's irresistible. So if you can give your students some sort of irresistible question as well, they're going to forget about the point. They're going to forget about, I'm not 100% sure how to say this in Spanish. They're just going to want to do it. So that's another great activity, one of those this or that activities. If you're doing a turn and talk, you can just project it on your board, and it could literally be apples or pumpkins, and you put a picture of each and you put the words underneath, and you just ask qual prefieres. And at your most novice level class, you're just looking for the basic answer. You can even put the sentence starter of yo prefiero on the bottom just to encourage the speaking. And then as you move up in proficiency level, encourage the why. Why do you prefer this? Why do you dislike the other? And just engage in a natural conversation. And they really enjoy those this or that activities a lot. I think it's just like a human nature thing. We all enjoy them and they love to participate. So I find like the juicier the question, the more they'll participate and forget about points. Some other examples are, instead of asking a question, sometimes just making a statement, something that you know will be controversial, like Taylor Swift is the best musical artist of all time, right? Like whether you agree or disagree, but just putting something that you know they're going to want to talk about, it gives them that motivation to engage in the conversation. And again, encourage them to stay in the target language. Another tool for that, as we spoke about on our last episode together, are the chat mats. If students have what they need in front of them, there's no excuse, because, right, we've all had that one student who says, I don't know anything in Spanish. I don't know how to say anything. This is my hardest class. Like they're defeatist. They're totally defeated from the start. And no matter what you say to them, I mean, I'm a very positive, silver lining person. So I'm always like, yeah, you can do it. Come on. And that one kid's just like, nope, this is my worst class and I can't wait to drop. And they have that negative attitude. So if I can give that student the responses they need, I could say, look, it's right here in front of you. Here's what you need to complete this activity. Now there's no excuse for English. There's no excuse for non-participation. It's just, here you go. Here's my juicy question. Here's what you need to complete it. Off to the races, and can try to do that.
Yeah, I like the idea of the chat mats. It's changing a bit of the narrative that we as teachers are having when it comes to spontaneous speaking. Because for a lot of time, I think that language teachers have looked at spontaneous conversations and speaking as having no scaffolding and no supports. And it's just supposed to go at it. I use the phrase that spontaneous means unscripted, but not unprepared.
Right.
And so that was kind of exactly what you were just talking to right there. And I think that's a good narrative for teachers to change in their mind about spontaneous speaking.
Yeah, so I agree. It's unscripted, but not unsupported, right? Like our students do need that support. And I think for a long time, people, or even still now, people hear about a chat mat or a support and they say, well, wait, we're giving them the answers. So how do we know what they really know, right? But I come from, again, I started teaching IB and AP about 12 years ago. And now on the IB exam, the current exam, students have to speak about an image or literature for 12 to 15 minutes in Spanish. That is a long time, right? So if we think about start to finish our language programs, that student's going to sit through Spanish 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera, till they get to the end of IB, and they have to be able to speak for that long. We can't expect them to just wake up one day and they can speak for 12 to 15 minutes in Spanish. We have to build that bridge slowly. So the chat mat is building that bridge, because as they look at it and refer to it over and over and over again, they memorize it. And eventually they don't need it. And I use the example of, like, think about our own lives. Training wheels, right? We all learned to ride a bike with some sort of training wheels or tricycle. We didn't just hop on a bike and go one day. Even just walking. Babies don't just walk. They crawl and then they couch surf. You know, we've always had some sort of support. So we have to realize that our students need that same, and they deserve that same support through their learning journey. And that builds their confidence and lowers their anxiety, because they start to say, oh, I've got this. I know what to say here.
And also using that training wheels analogy is another part of the narrative for teachers, that they think, oh, if they have the chat mat, they have the support, it's always there. And just by saying training wheels, the whole idea is eventually it goes away and they do it on
Exactly.
their own, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think about myself and anything. And I think sometimes, we're the quote unquote expert in the room, right? We're teaching our students, we're the expert. And so we forget what it's like to be in that seat sometimes and to be uncomfortable with learning something new. And I encourage you to try a new hobby outside of your comfort zone and you will get humbled real quick. Like I decided to try to make sourdough. I mean, there's a zillion videos and resources online, and I'm looking at all these recipes and I'm using all of this support. Hopefully one day I'll have my recipe and I'll know what I'm doing and I'm getting there. But I didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to make sourdough and here's how I do it. I used a lot of support. So I think we just have to realize that, a chat mat or even just projecting expressions on the board for them to use, it's going to help get you that end product that you want, which is them speaking, and it's going to give them confidence. So it's okay to use it.
Yeah, I think when teachers are listening to this conversation or they saw the title of this episode where it's like, I'm going to get these techniques to get students speaking. And it's sort of so they're not just going to spontaneously start speaking without any support. No, they need those support. So hopefully that's a little bit of a realization. And also, not that we're here to give permission, but I think we're a little bit here to give permission to teachers that, it's not just going to be this spontaneous situation. So go into your classroom and don't hide the scaffolds when people come around. Like that gets
Right.
totally fine.
Right. You don't have to hide and stuff them under a pile as an administrator comes in. No, like our students should have access to that. And I think, again, going back to the title of our episode, it's not just the technique, because we've all gone to a conference and seen something. We say, oh, let me try that in my classroom. And you go and you try it and it doesn't work out. For the theory behind the technique. And you have to sort of set up your classroom for that technique to be successful, because an activity is just an activity without the proper preparation for your classroom and your students. And we want our students to feel comfortable. We want them to feel confident, to be able to take risks. So if we don't build that comfort level and that classroom community, that this is a place where mistakes will happen, perfection is not expected. I always tell my students that our goal is proficiency, not perfection. Perfection is not attainable. I always use myself as an example. I said, I make mistakes in Spanish all the time. I make mistakes in English all the time, as do you. And I tell them, you make mistakes in English all the time and you're going to make mistakes. And that's how we learn and that's how we grow. So once I kind of tell that and they look at you like, oh, okay, but giving them permission to be imperfect and to be on this journey is another little aha moment for them of, okay, she doesn't expect perfection. She expects my real work and where I really am. And so I think once we create that comfortable classroom, we can do these activities and be successful with them instead of going in, just trying the activity and you still have that negative attitude from students. And if we don't break that negative attitude and give them a more positive experience, positive environment, the activity is going to fall flat.
Well, just having that conversation with your students helps to lower their aversion to risk, right?
Yes.
That having just that conversation. And so I just want to touch upon the idea of assessment. So at the end of this is all building towards an assessment at some point. And so what's that conversation like when they have this idea that the assessment is where I have to do it perfectly, particularly if you're looking at your IB and AP students? So how do you have that same conversation to sort of go for it, take the risk, this isn't graded, but then there's that situation where it actually is graded? How do they carry that same confidence and motivation and understanding into that task?
So something that I've learned and I think is really interesting. So again, I teach in an IB school. So my class is co-seated, IB and AP. All of my students take the IB exams. Only some take the AP exam as an optional. So we really focus on IB. And when you look at the IB rubric, and my students are taking higher level, which is the most advanced exam, the highest band on the speaking and also on the writing, it says, errors do not impede comprehensibility. So I make sure to bring that up and I circle it and I say, see right here, errors. So you're expected to make errors at this highest level do not impede comprehensibility. So it actually really helps my argument of proficiency over perfection, because they say, oh yeah, she was right. I just have to be able to get my point across. And, I try to explain that to them with having a really strong base in Spanish, having knowledge of your sweet 16 verbs. And I have them hanging in my room and I tell them, if you can master these and you can use these really well, you can say almost anything you need to say and get your point across. And again, for those weaker, less confident students, that's very manageable. They're looking at that like, wow, those verbs can help me say what I need to say. So I think just like having those conversations of perfection is not expected, even at the highest level exam. And also what you have is good enough to get your message across. You just have to be able to use it, in the right way. You're not going to be able to speak a second language as well as you speak your first language, because you just simply don't have enough exposure to it yet. And I try to give them that perspective.
Yes. So sometimes when we do these speaking activities, when we create them in our classroom, and our classroom is essentially an artificial place in terms of it's not an authentic place for using the language. They're not traveling somewhere. They're not in the restaurant down the street. They're
Right.
in our classroom with us. So to some degree, it's always going to be somewhat artificial. So how can you take that sometimes what feels like artificial speaking tasks and design them in a way that feel really authentic and meaningful in the classroom? And to also bring it back to when you were talking about those compelling topics for students and like connect it with that so we can connect the dots there.
Sure. Yeah, I think in recent years in New York State now as a whole, but especially in my school and our department, we've really focused on assessing through IPAs, integrated performance assessments. And that has really helped change how I view assessment. Because again, years ago, exactly like you said, one student was the waiter, one student was the patron in a restaurant, and they had to have a conversation about the meal. And if you step back and think about it, you're like, well, is my level 1 student really going to be the waiter when it's their limited vocabulary? Probably not. And also, that's not something that, if we're talking about level 1, a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, they don't have a job. So this is totally foreign to them, language and also experience-wise. So you really want to try to change it and make it more relevant to them. And that's, again, where they get excited about it. So instead of, you're the waiter in a Mexican restaurant and talk to the patron about their meal, try, you and your friends are planning a birthday party for your best friend. Discuss her favorite and least favorite foods, maybe categorize them into appetizer, main dish, dessert, drinks, and plan a menu. And that is exciting for them because they're thinking, ooh, best friend, what does my best friend like? Food, what drinks are we going to have? They're all foodies now. They are really into food. And that's compelling and engaging for them. So we just have to think about our topics and how can we make them exciting for our students. And I think you really just have to think about that personal connection. And I know sometimes it's tough. Like somebody made me think about this once with a weekend chat, asking kids, hey, what'd you do over the summer? And if you're in an area where some students are maybe traveling the world and going on these amazing trips and other students are, they can't wait to get back to school because that's their safe place, you don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And I can totally understand that. But I think that getting personal with our students in a comfortable way like this, like not telling them, tell us, what your party would be like, what's your budget, but just have this imaginary party for your best friend, for a friend. Everybody can put someone in their mind and then plan it. It's something attainable for all of them. It's relatable, it's interesting, and it's engaging for them.
So I was going back to what you said at the very beginning with the affective filter. And so that's Stephen Krashen. And so I think a lot about he has his comprehensible input hypothesis, which is where CI comes from. but he also has his compelling input hypothesis, which is what all this is. And now I'm thinking I want to add on to that and say it's not just a compelling input, but it's a compelling scenario. It's a
Right.
compelling format that it's
Right.
not just the language, but how they're using it.
Exactly. And I think just think about, what technology are students using? What experiences are they having? And you can really relate anything you're doing in class to your students. Sometimes you have to think a little bit outside of the box. But I will say too, if you're really stuck, here's a great place to use AI, right? Hop onto AI and say, here's a topic that we're doing in my class. I want to make this more relatable to this age group. Can you give me some ideas? And sometimes it'll say something, you're like, oh, I didn't even think of that. And this is a great place to use AI to just give you inspiration for your classroom.
Absolutely. So for teachers that are listening to us right now and they're feeling inspired and maybe they haven't been doing a ton of speaking activities in their classroom, can you tell them some way that tomorrow they can go in their class? Maybe they're listening to this on the way to school this morning in the car and they're going into their classroom. And what is one target language speaking task that they could do to boost talking in their classroom right away?
So it's so hard to pick one because I have so many favorites.
You can give us a couple if you want.
Okay. I like to really try to pick one. It's so hard. I think it all depends on your group, your dynamics. I think the first thing is, again, before doing anything, just reminding them, hey guys, we're all learning together. No one's perfect here. Let's have some fun with the language. This is, we're a unique content area. We get to have these conversations with our students where they don't get to talk to their math teacher like this necessarily inside of the classroom. And it's funny because we'll know things about our students. Like I'll know about my student's dog or something or their best friend. And my colleagues are like, how do you know that? And I said, because we talk about it all the time in class and we do it in the target language. So we have a really unique opportunity. So I think I'm going to go with two. Okay, I'll pick two instead of one. So I would say the this or that, in my experience, has been most compelling. It's not super high prep either for you. You can just create, even if you go onto Canva, they have a lot of templates already done for you. You can hop on. And what I like to do is I like to Google a quiz like in English that is relevant to the time. So you could do fall, this or that quiz, look it up and pick a couple that are relevant to your age group. And then just put it in a comprehensible way for your students. So if it's novice, an image and the word, and again, you're just asking them to respond, which do they prefer? And as you go up in proficiency, you're going to ask them a few more questions. And a lot of people say, well, how is this a speaking activity? If I'm just showing them something and I'm just saying, okay, which do you prefer? But it's the questions that follow that are most important. So I will, of course, always make it about myself. Oh, I love apple pie. I don't like pumpkin, really over dramatic. And they're like, what? Why? And then I explain, you try to explain and connect with them. Who else prefers apples? And you're my people, mi gente. That's what, like, a people manzana. We make it like a whole fun thing. And it gets a little bit more exciting for them. So I would say this or that. Again, because my students call it a game. They don't realize it's an activity when they come back and say, can we play that game again? That for me is like, check, that's a win. So that, and I think everybody should be doing some sort of weekend chat, again, to connect with your students, to give authentic language experience. This is a conversation they could have with anyone. What did you do over the weekend? So it's relevant, it's authentic. It gives them an opportunity to share a little bit about themselves. If somebody is not comfortable sharing, they can just say, I slept a lot, I worked on my homework, I studied. Or, there are safe ways for them to answer that. And some students will tell you everything and more than you ever wanted to know about their weekend and their plans. And that all builds that connection and that community in your classroom that will set you up for success throughout the entire year. So those are the two I think. This or that, because it's fun and exciting for students. Weekend chat can be fun and exciting. You just have to get a little creative with how you do it. But again, to connect and to show them that you're listening to them, you want to learn about them and you care. And that's a really great way to do it.
Yeah. So the this or that activity, it's something I've tried in my class. And early on, it was sort of just for the students. And I got this idea one time. We were reading a CI novel. I kind of teach with a novice, more intermediate level. And so we ended up doing the this or that activity, but they had to be a person from the story.
I love that.
So it was which would they choose? And so we ended up
Mhm.
having to use conditional in there. They would choose this because,
Right.
so it's like, even though we're like, oh, it's just this or that, like apples or oranges, like you could take that. So, like we were saying at the beginning, you have your routines and your structure, and then you can just throw any kind of content in there. They know it's the this or that activity.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the more we do it, the more they'll give you those answers you're looking for instead of just the I prefer this and they stop speaking. They'll really give you a little bit more background information.
Yes, absolutely. And you could go further. You could do a graph of everybody's answers and what did we think at the beginning. And
Yeah.
just like if you start there, you can kind of go on.
The ranking, I love doing that. I was inspired by that when reading the book Common Ground.
Mhm.
And they mentioned ranking. And I said, oh my gosh, why have I never thought of this? I'm always like, which do you prefer? But
Mhm.
what about ranking them? One time we just did fast food. Like I said, all right, what are the, 5 most popular fast foods in our area? Here they are. Okay, now let's rank them best to worst. And again, fast food and teenagers, this was a heated debate. And it was very heated and very engaging. So because it's relevant to them. So that's a good one too, the ranking. I really like that, the graph.
And you get the responses. Great.
Yeah.
Where are you continuing to go down your teacher journey? What are you looking at where you can recommend to teachers to go on that journey with you?
So I think there's so many resources. It can feel really overwhelming sometimes. I'm a very visual learner, so I do like to get some ideas from social media. And I actually, believe it or not, I like to look at a lot of elementary teachers that may not be language related because I think about when kids are so excited about school and that joy in elementary classrooms that sometimes as the older high school teachers, we don't always get. So I look at that and I look at a lot of on Instagram teachers, elementary teachers. I follow a lot of language teachers on Instagram. There's so many great things. But I think personally, the best resource is a conference. I would encourage anyone to find a local conference, a state conference. And we have so many great world language organizations, so much talent that is, willing to share with you. And you can go, you can meet other teachers who are in the trenches with you. You can have really great discussions and you just leave feeling refreshed. And sometimes you leave and you say, wow, other people are going through the same thing I'm going through, and you feel better. And then you also leave excited to try some new things next week. So I think conferences are the hidden gem. And I love connecting with people online, but there's nothing like an in-person conference to, boost your energy and get you through the year.
And your last workshop at Nicefelt was the one that sent you on to Nextville on Chat Mats, and you're presenting at Nicefelt again this year. I don't know if you already did or you will, depending on when this episode comes out, but what is your topic for Nicefelt this year?
So for Nicefelt this year, my topic is trickling down, incorporating advanced strategies in lower level. So again, coming from my lens of, I teach a lot of the upper level AP/IB. How can we take what students have to do and how can we kind of trickle it down to novice classes and intermediate classes where they're getting prepared for what they have to do later on, and also just learning some different ways to engage them at the lower levels.
Okay, well, I will be at Nicefelt, and I will definitely be there for that, taking notes
Thanks.
for our next podcast conversation.
Oh, thanks. I can't wait to see you.
I love that. I love that topic. That is so great. It's the ultimate backwards planning.
Yes, I'm excited about it. I have so many ideas rolling around in my head, and I'm really looking forward to sharing and connecting with other teachers.
Yes. So speaking of connecting with teachers, how can our listeners be connecting with you?
So as mentioned, I am guilty of spending too much time on Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at Super Senora. It's all spelled out. I also have a blog, supersenora.com, where I share ideas, resources, trials and tribulations of just being in the trenches. So you can find me there.
I will make sure that all of your social media is in the show notes for everyone so they can find you. And before we say goodbye, I like to leave our listeners with a nice, I call it hearty piece of advice about teaching, life, anything you want. What can you share with us?
Give your students a variety of opportunities to be successful. So when I was thinking of this, I thought of, sometimes we have these high risk activities where students have to really go out on a limb, whether that's like making a presentation in front of the class or having a debate with other people watching them, a gallery walk where they're sort of on. We want to give them a chance to be successful at the low risk activities also, for this or that. A human bingo, find someone who, having a snowball fight where they're throwing questions at each other and they're reading them and anything like that that's lower risk. We want to just be mindful. When I'm planning and I'm thinking of my unit or my content, I'm thinking about, okay, this is going to be risky for students. So how can I build up their confidence before they get there? And I think that for them, it's a win because they'll feel more confident when doing it and less anxious, as we mentioned before. And also for you, it's a win because your student will be more confident, and that's essentially what we want. And just thinking about that and thinking about the little steps that get us to that big goal and rewarding them. I mean, a smile, a positive compliment, a sticker, a pencil, little things go a long way, and just recognizing those wins, and everybody has a different win, I think is huge.
Well, thank you for leaving us with that idea of finding those opportunities to be successful. To stay positive, when you see your students be successful, that is what is motivating for us as teachers. So Thank you so much for leaving that with us. Well, I appreciate all of your incredible insights, and I'm looking forward to seeing your workshop in person coming up in a couple of weeks. And I'm sure teachers will be reaching out to you and looking at your blog for more ideas. But thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you.
What are your takeaways from that conversation with Christina Margiore? I'm guessing you have a few new things you'd like to try out with your students to get them talking regularly and confidently. So be sure to check out the show notes if you want to connect with Christina. And thank you personally for all that you do on a daily basis to support and motivate your students. I very much appreciate supporting you and your language teacher colleagues as you bring effective, proficiency-focused strategies into your classrooms. And as a reminder, I provide on-site workshops, live virtual sessions, self-paced departmental PD, and my new Ready for Tomorrow Quick Win courses for individual teachers just like you. You can find all the links in the show notes or on my website, wlclassroom.com. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And let's stay connected on social media. You can find me at WL Classroom pretty much everywhere. You'll also find lots of ideas, suggestions, and resources on my website, wlclassroom.com. Now stay curious, keep learning, and continue the great work you do inspiring and supporting your students.